She was on the cover of Forbes magazine. She was worth $4.5 billion on paper. She was called the next Steve Jobs. She wore his signature black turtleneck. She gave TED Talks. She appeared on magazine covers worldwide. Then it all collapsed. Elizabeth Holmes built a medical empire on a lie. A lie so dangerous that people's lives were put at risk. A lie so convincing that some of the most powerful people in the world believed it. This is the story of Elizabeth Holmes, the greatest fraud in Silicon Valley history. Elizabeth Holmes was born in Washington, D.C. in 1984. From childhood, she was ambitious beyond measure. Her family was comfortable but not wealthy, and Elizabeth grew up watching her father work in government and business. She was obsessed with success. As a teenager, she told her father she wanted to be a billionaire. Not just successful, a billionaire. In 2002, she enrolled at Stanford University to study chemical engineering. She was brilliant, driven, and magnetic. But after just 1 year, she dropped out. She had an idea she believed would change the world. Elizabeth's idea was simple but revolutionary. What if you could run hundreds of medical blood tests using just a single drop of blood from a finger prick? No needles, no syringes, no waiting days for results. She called the technology Edison. She called the company Theranos, a combination of the words therapy and diagnosis. The concept was brilliant. If it worked, it would democratize healthcare. Poor people, rich people, anyone could access fast, cheap, accurate medical testing. It could detect cancer, diabetes, HIV, and hundreds of other conditions from a single drop of blood. There was just one problem. The technology didn't work. But Elizabeth didn't let that stop her. She was a masterful storyteller, a visionary speaker, and she knew how to sell a dream. She pitched her idea to investors with passionate conviction. She spoke about her technology as if it already existed, as if it already worked perfectly, and people believed her. George Shultz, former U.S. Secretary of State, invested and joined her board. Henry Kissinger, legendary diplomat, joined her board. James Mattis, future U.S. Secretary of Defense, joined her board. Rupert Murdoch, media mogul, invested $125 million. Walmart's Walton family invested. Larry Ellison, Oracle founder, invested. These were not naive people. These were some of the most powerful, experienced, and intelligent figures in American business and politics. But Elizabeth had a gift. She could make people see what wasn't there. She could make them believe in a future that didn't yet exist. By 2014, Theranos was valued at $9 billion. Elizabeth Holmes was worth $4.5 billion on paper. She was 30 years old. Time magazine named her one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Forbes called her the youngest female self-made billionaire in history. She graced magazine covers. She gave speeches. She wore that black turtleneck, channeling Steve Jobs, speaking in a deep, deliberate voice about changing the world. The world was at her feet. But inside Theranos, something very different was happening. The Edison machine didn't work. The technology Elizabeth had promised investors and patients simply could not do what she claimed. Running hundreds of accurate tests from a single drop of blood was, with the technology available, scientifically impossible. So what was Theranos actually doing? They were secretly running most of their tests on conventional blood testing machines made by Siemens, the same machines used by every other lab in the country. They were diluting the small blood samples to make them work on these machines, which introduced errors and inaccuracies. And the results? They were wildly inaccurate. Tests that showed patients had HIV when they didn't. Tests that missed serious conditions. False positives. False negatives. Patients were making medical decisions based on incorrect results. Some went into unnecessary panic. Others may have missed genuine diagnoses. Inside the company, employees who raised concerns were fired or intimidated into silence. Elizabeth's partner, company president Ramesh Sunny Balwani, created a culture of fear. Employees were monitored. They were told not to discuss their work with anyone, even family members. People who left Theranos signed non-disclosure agreements and were threatened with lawsuits if they spoke out. The fraud was massive, and it was working perfectly. In 2013, Theranos partnered with Walgreens pharmacy chain to offer blood testing services in stores across America. Real patients, real medical decisions. Based on Theranos technology, people lined up at Walgreens to get tested. They trusted that the FDA had approved the technology. They trusted that their results were accurate. They had no idea that the machine giving them their results had never been properly validated, that the company behind it was built on fiction. Theranos was now not just deceiving investors. It was deceiving patients, people who needed accurate medical information to make life or death decisions. The consequences were real. The danger was real. And still, nobody outside the company knew. In 2015, everything changed. Wall Street Journal reporter John Carreyrou received a tip. A former Theranos employee had concerns about the technology. Carreyrou began investigating. He spoke to more former employees, all terrified of retaliation, many speaking anonymously. What they told him was explosive. Theranos threatened to sue Carreyrou and the Wall Street Journal to stop the story. Elizabeth Holmes went on CNBC to personally discredit the investigation, calling it factually and scientifically wrong. But Carreyrou published anyway. In October 2015, the Wall Street Journal ran a front-page story questioning Theranos technology. The world began to look closer. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services investigated Theranos laboratory. What they found was damning. The lab posed immediate jeopardy to patient health and safety. Regulators banned Elizabeth Holmes from operating medical laboratories for 2 years. Walgreens terminated its partnership with Theranos. Investors began demanding answers. The empire was crumbling. In 2018, the U.S. Department of Justice indicted Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani on multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy. Theranos, once valued at $9 billion, was dissolved. The company was worth nothing. All those billions existed only on paper, built on a lie. The investors who had poured hundreds of millions into Theranos lost everything. But perhaps most tragically, the patients who had trusted Theranos with their health had been betrayed. Their medical results, the information they'd used to make healthcare decisions, had come from a fraudulent system. Elizabeth Holmes, the woman who had been worth $4.5 billion, was now facing criminal charges that could put her in prison for decades. Elizabeth Holmes went on trial in 2021. The trial lasted months and captured the world's attention. Her defense strategy was controversial. She claimed that Sunny Balwani, her business partner and former romantic partner, had psychologically abused her and controlled her behavior. She claimed she was a victim too. She took the stand herself, speaking in that same deliberate, confident voice. She denied knowing the technology didn't work. She claimed she genuinely believed in Theranos. Prosecutors painted a very different picture. They showed emails, text messages, and testimony from former employees that proved Elizabeth knew exactly what was happening, that she had personally directed the deception. In January 2022, after 7 days of deliberation, the jury delivered its verdict. Guilty on 4 counts of fraud. Elizabeth Holmes, once the youngest female billionaire in history, was convicted of defrauding investors. In November 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. She arrived at a federal prison camp in Texas in May 2023 to begin serving her sentence. Before reporting to prison, she had a baby, her second child, with her partner Billy Evans, whose wealthy family had stood by her throughout the trial. Sunny Balwani was tried separately and convicted on 12 counts of fraud. He was sentenced to nearly 13 years in prison. The victims of Theranos, both investors and patients, are still dealing with the aftermath. Some lost their life savings. Others are still uncertain about medical decisions they made based on faulty Theranos results. John Carreyrou, the journalist who broke the story, wrote a best-selling book called Bad Blood: Secrets and Lies in a Silicon Valley Startup. It was later adapted into a Hulu series called The Dropout, starring Amanda Seyfried as Elizabeth Holmes. What makes the Elizabeth Holmes story so fascinating is the question that everyone asks. Did she know? Did she know from the beginning that the technology didn't work? Was it always a deliberate fraud? Or did she start as a true believer who crossed a line somewhere and couldn't go back? Psychologists and journalists who studied her case describe a person with extraordinary ability to compartmentalize, to believe her own narrative, to project such confidence that others believed it too. Some say she displayed traits of narcissism and sociopathy. Others say she was a visionary who got in over her head and made catastrophic decisions under pressure. What's clear is this: she knew the tests were inaccurate. She knew patients were receiving unreliable results. And she continued anyway. Whether that came from calculated deception or delusional self-belief, the outcome was the same. The Elizabeth Holmes case changed Silicon Valley forever. The culture of fake it till you make it that had been celebrated in tech was suddenly under scrutiny. Investors became more demanding of actual proof. Regulators looked more carefully at healthcare startups. But Holmes also became a cultural phenomenon. She was the subject of books, podcasts, documentaries, and a critically acclaimed TV series. People were endlessly fascinated by her. How did she fool so many smart people? Was she a villain or a victim? Could she have succeeded if the technology had actually worked? These questions don't have easy answers, but they reveal something important about how we worship success, how we want to believe in visionaries, and how dangerous that belief can be when it's misplaced. Elizabeth Holmes wanted to change the world. She wanted to be a billionaire. She wanted to be the next Steve Jobs. She achieved a kind of fame she never intended. Not as a visionary who revolutionized healthcare, but as a cautionary tale about ambition without integrity. She sits in a federal prison in Texas today, with years left on her sentence. The billions are gone. The empire is dust. The black turtleneck is put away. What remains are the questions she never fully answered. How much did she know? How much did she believe? And could the world's greatest fraud have been avoided if just one person had told the truth? What do you think? Was Elizabeth Holmes a deliberate fraudster or a true believer who lost her way? Share your thoughts in the comments. And subscribe to Dark Vault Stories for more shocking true crime and celebrity scandal stories every week.